Nintendo's easily one of the most beloved video game companies of all time, thanks to all the countless classic and wacky adventures their games have taken us on over the years. But as great as the above-average-sized end can be, they could also be frustrating as all hell by doing so many things that piss people off, like taking $20 games off of the Wii U's eShop when the Switch gets a $60 version, limiting popular games, canceling a tournament for Smash Bros. Melee during a pandemic because modifications are required to play the game online, canceling the broadcast of a Splatoon tournament because some of the players are showing support for the Melee community, and even sending a cease and desist to the makers of the Eticons, despite the fact that the proceeds were going to charity. So it's easy to understand why so many people would interpret these actions as Nintendo hating their own fan base, but despite what some may say, I think the truth is that they really don't. So why do they do the things they do? Well, turn your speakers up to full blast, press the subscribe button if you like games, goofs, and glory, and allow me, YouTube's strongest growing boy, Cameron all one word, to tell you why Nintendo hates their own fans, except for the fact that they really don't. Alright, so I know Nintendo takes a lot of heat for doing so many different things, and for good reason, too. I mean, as much as I love N-Dog, I'm not above calling them out whenever it's necessary, not because I want to be a dick, but because fans calling them out in the past is the reason why they're not nearly as bad as they used to be. But as frustrating as they could be, I think it's important that we all remember the positives as well in the interest of fairness. I mean, after all, if Nintendo really were that greedy, then I'm sure they could pump new Mario Karts and Smash games out every year like other companies do for all the annual sports games and shooters and all that. Plus, the quality control for the games has almost always been top-notch, not just because the games are fun per se, but because Nintendo's never been that crazy about the idea of releasing unfinished games with the intentions of just patching them up later on. Not only is the quality control applied to the software, but the hardware has always been quite durable as well. I mean, one of the requirements for the original DS during development was that it had to still work after being dropped multiple times, and they even repaired Famicoms until 2007, long after the system was dead, not because they wanted people to just buy the new hardware, but because they really didn't have any of the parts lying around anymore, which is easy to understand for a console that was made in the early 80s. But while I don't think that Nintendo's necessarily evil for doing some of the things that myself and most others find to be scummy, I'm also not saying that Nintendo are angels for doing some of the things that we perceive to be good, because at the end of the day, they're just doing what they think's best for business, like most companies do. I mean, it's really easy to see some of their less popular tactics as evil, especially when they're going after charities, but nobody ever really considers the fact that whether it be good or bad, Nintendo's always got the exact same motives behind their tactics. You see, companies do evil things to make money all the time, sure, but doing good things earns companies goodwill, which in turn makes them more money in the long run. And if you're doing something good for money, then I don't think that automatically makes you a good person. For example, Netflix removed Chappelle's Show from their service simply because Dave Chappelle was upset about the fact that he didn't own the rights to it anymore and wasn't being paid for it, which in turn made him happy that they did that, but Netflix wasn't necessarily taking Chappelle's feelings into consideration by taking the show down. They just realized that his stand-up specials were far more valuable than his 20-year-old sketch comedy show, and that it wasn't worth keeping if it was going to risk losing new specials down the line. Don't get me wrong, though, the executives might have genuinely cared about the guy's feelings, but all I'm saying is that their actions don't necessarily prove it, because at the end of the day, the morally right decision also happened to be the most lucrative one as well. Man, ever since Phil Spencer became the emperor of Xbox, Microsoft's been doing all sorts of consumer-friendly things, like keeping Minecraft on rival platforms after buying Mojang, allowing Banjo and Smash, advocating for crossplay among all platforms, being honest about the fact that the Series X wasn't going to have any exclusives for 2 years, among other things that I'm either forgetting or don't even know about. But again, this doesn't prove or disprove that Phil Spencer's a nice guy. All it proves is that he's a good businessman, because before he took over, the Xbox brand had a pretty bad reputation thanks to half of the 360s being defected, and for all the DRM policies that the Xbox One tried forcing on the consumer when Microsoft thought that they were the kings of the gaming industry. And I must say that after years of really not liking the Xbox brand myself, I'm gonna be buying all my multiplats on the Series X, not just because of all the good gestures, but because Sony's been acting up a bit lately with censorship policies, lying about the PS5 launch games, and of course being wieners about crossplay, something Nintendo's got no problem with, by the way. I'm not supporting Xbox because I think they're morally superior. I'm just trying to reward good behavior in the same way that I give my dog Stevie a treat for not biting the cable guy in the dick. But I know, if good PR makes more money than bad PR, then it really doesn't make sense that Nintendo would do some of the things they do that most of us find to be scummy, especially since doing these things doesn't even make them any actual money and really just comes off as being dicks just because they can. I mean, when they port Wii U games over to the Switch for $60, it's not like even one person was actually going to buy these games on the Wii U eShop for $20, seeing as how nobody even owns that console in the first place. So taking those versions down really only made Nintendo come off as greedy, and it's not like letting a few competitive Smash players emulate Melee for one tournament during a global pandemic and just an overall crappy year was going to result in Nintendo losing even $1, whereas canceling the tournament, on the other hand, literally only makes people like the company a little bit less, which in turn actually loses them some money. Granted, it won't be much money, but it's not like anybody said, "Whoa, Nintendo canceled the Smash tournament over mods? That's awesome, I'm gonna go buy a Switch in like 4 games." And then, of course, there's the issue of Nintendo resorting to a cease and desist over the Eticons. For those of you who don't know, the Eticons are Joy-Con shells that were made in honor of Etika, who, as we all know, was a popular YouTuber and Nintendo fan who tragically took his own life. He was known for his love of the Joy-Cons in particular, hence the name of his fan base being the Joy-Con Boys. And the idea behind the Eticons is that the proceeds for each sale would go to the JED Foundation for teen and young adult mental health awareness. But the issue that Nintendo had with this is that these Joy-Cons use the logo and straight up just say Joy-Con, which you legally can't do. Some people think that it becomes an entirely different thing because the word boys was added to the bottom, and I'm sure it's possible that you might be able to get away with it if you had a good enough lawyer, seeing as how Vanilla Ice was able to rip Under Pressure off without getting in trouble. But like, I'm pretty sure I'd get a cease and desist if I made a game console called the PlayStation 5 Boy, so even though I'm legally not allowed to describe myself as a lawyer anymore in 48 states under Penal Code 69, I'm pretty sure that Nintendo does technically have the right to send a cease and desist over the term Joy-Con Boys, but like, I also technically have the right to stop wiping my ass without a bidet, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good idea, even though it might actually be better for the environment, come to think of it. But apparently the creator of the Eticons doesn't give 100% of the proceeds to the JED Foundation. However, it's to my understanding that most of it does, and that any excess money was put into the expenses related to the project. Obviously, I can't prove this since I don't know the guy, and I'm also not legally allowed to identify myself as a detective anymore in the state of Florida where he's based in, but I think we can give him the benefit of the doubt since I'm pretty sure the guy's not swimming in riches or anything like that, and I can't fathom that Nintendo thinks that he is either, so at the end of the day, they're basically just taking money out of a charity's pocket and throwing it into a river, and much like other times they've ruined a good thing, they're not even making any money off of shutting this down either. I mean, I suppose it is possible that one or two people who were gonna buy the Eticons might have instead bought Joy-Cons that Nintendo would have actually made money off of, but like, sending a lawyer in to pee all over everything's not gonna convince these people to buy another pair. It's just gonna make these people like Nintendo less and possibly even boycott them. I'm sure there won't be too many people who actually take it that far, and that the few who do will probably end up buying Nintendo products before long, given how fun the games are, but I do still think Nintendo's gonna lose more money from being dicks about the Eticons rather than just letting it slide like they did with the church-funded Wisdom Tree making unauthorized NES games. I mean, the reason they didn't stop that back in the day is because they wanted to avoid getting bad PR, so it's not like they don't see the value in not being dicks, it's just that they don't really have the best judgment sometimes. Although, if we're looking at the bright side of Nintendo shutting the Eticons down, though, this is a good opportunity for Captain Alex, or really anybody else, to capitalize on this increased awareness and just take the Joy-Con logo off of the Eticons or spell it slightly differently or something, I don't know. Because I'm pretty sure there's tons of people out there like myself who had no idea this was even a thing before Nintendo tried stopping it, which could actually end up helping the JED Foundation way more after it's all said and done, as long as they don't just give up on the idea. But even if that ends up being the case in the long run, though, Nintendo's not going to deserve any credit for it, because if I decided to crash my car into a school bus, and then it turns out that the school bus was actually full of hired goons who were on their way to commit heinous crimes, then I'd still deserve to get sent to the slammer based on what my original intentions were. But as for why Nintendo's making all these decisions that most people find to be scummy without even making any money in exchange for the goodwill, though, the short answer is that the people in charge are old, out-of-touch Japanese businessmen with very different backgrounds from anybody who's watching this video. And at the end of the day, they just plain suck at reading the room.
Oh, good?
It's not that they're evil per se, it's just that things are very different in Japan, and I'm sure if you ask the average Japanese person on the street, then they'd probably think that Nintendo was in the right for a lot of these decisions. I mean, even something as simple as renting games was outlawed in Japan a long time ago, and even Uber can't succeed because the government's trying to protect taxis, which, to be fair, aren't as god-awful over there as they are in the US. But my point is that while Western cultures might see all these actions as evil, Nintendo probably honestly believes that they're protecting their IPs, and that the Eticons are the same thing as someone selling bootleg copies of their games in the name of charity, which would be like robbing the Nintendo store in New York City and giving the money to a good cause. Like, yeah, money going to charity's a good thing, but if the money's coming out of somebody else's pocket, then you're basically forcing them to donate, which honestly isn't right, especially if the party involved already does a lot for charity in the first place. Don't get me wrong, selling the Eticons obviously nowhere near the same thing as robbing the Nintendo store in New York City, but I'm pretty sure that's how Nintendo sees it, so the problem at hand isn't necessarily that Nintendo's evil, it's just that they're doing something that's really stupid, so I'm absolutely not saying that we should just let them off the hook, because after all, riding their asses is why we've seen as many positive changes as we have so far, like the end of the Nintendo Creators Program and independent Smash tournaments even being allowed to exist in the first place. And look, if anything that any corporation does makes you want to stop supporting them altogether, then by all means speak with your wallet, but all I'm saying is that these things do take time, and that I truly believe that Nintendo isn't evil, nor do I believe that they hate their fan base. I just think that some of the key people in charge are out of touch is all. But anyway, that's all for today though, so let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody at some point. But if you like this video though, then you might like my tier list on Nintendo gimmicks, but if you'll excuse me, I gotta go take a phone call from my stepdad who's in jail right now. Later.
I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.